Conditional Access has tons of cool options for advanced scenarios to make Entra incredibly secure, but if you do it wrong, stuff's gonna hurt. In an earlier video, we covered the fundamentals and globally relevant policies for conditional access. Now, we're going to focus on nuanced, high security scenarios that are quite intricate, but they can really help you push conditional access possibilities. Things like cloud app allow listing, unmanaged device restrictions, admin access design, and ultimately what it means to trade usability for control in these really advanced conditional access scenarios. I'm Rue Campbell with Nathan Hutchison, both Microsoft MVPs at ThreatScape, and this is a practical look at advanced conditional access design. So let's get into it. Last time we covered all sorts of stuff. If I head into the Entra Admin Center now, I can maybe recap what we covered in the last video. We'll put the link for that in the description, by the way, folks, to check that out first. Last time we covered the fundamentals of conditional access in depth, right? Really help folk master understanding those fundamentals. And then we covered what, in the list of things we're looking at here now, are these global policies, right? So they're kind of conditional access settings that would help folks out almost generically, right? Like, hey, everyone should be doing MFA, everyone should block device code flow and stuff like that, right? And I guess what we should get into now are advanced scenarios, because I mean, I know for a fact that you encounter these, what feels like I was going to say every single week, but it feels like every single day now I talk to you and you're ramming your head against conditional access, coming up with all sorts of kind of cool nuanced scenarios. And maybe, you know what, if I just dig in here, we'll start talking about the first one right on the list here. Not too advanced, but worth covering to get the ball rolling, right, is this concept of blocking unmanaged devices in conditional access, right? So like maybe like if I head into this one and talk folks through, like I'll maybe head to conditions as the starting point, and then I'll go to this page here. What am I looking at here, right? What's the benefit of this and what do I need to know here?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of does what it says on the tin, really. In terms of the persona, clearly got a great naming scheme going on, so we can see there that it's scoped to our admin users. In terms of our target resources, we are following that zero trust approach. So we are targeting all resources, normally all cloud apps. Like you've kind of pulled up on screen here, the key bit there is we're using the condition filter for devices. And in this case, we're actually excluding Intune compliant devices or Microsoft Entra hybrid join devices, which essentially means anything outside of those is going to be targeted by this policy. And I guess the outcome of that is that if any admin user tries to access any cloud application from any unmanaged device, that grant control is going to trigger, which is essentially going to block access, therefore blocking access from unmanaged devices.
Right. And but I kind of tie this together, like one of the other ways, I guess, of doing this, right, is instead of doing conditions and then this stuff, you can go to grant and then say require to be marked as compliant or require hybrid joined. And I guess there's pros and cons to both approaches, right? When you're working with customers, is there a general preference there? Or what's your take on that? Because I got a take, but I'm wondering what other folks think.
So again, I mean, I've been quite lucky with a lot of the clients that we deal with, insofar as they're quite good at accepting let's say the zero trust approach that we usually take, which is implementing it using filters. So I typically implement it this way. In terms of my reasoning for why we would do it this way is mainly because if you use the grant control for require a compliant device, there is an additional step there insofar as when an end user tries to access an application from a non-compliant device, they get a different error screen. Rather than it just sort of default blocking the sign-in, which it would do in the scenario we were looking at before, they actually get a pop-up prompt that says you need to come in from a compliant device. And the reason why I don't like that is because if I'm an adversary, that kind of gives me additional information. I now know that actually I need a compliant device in order to satisfy this particular access control policy, right? And so from a reconnaissance perspective, it's quite useful for an adversary. So that's kind of the main reason why I don't like to use it. And I guess second to that is if you then don't also have your platform enrollment restrictions sufficiently strict on the Intune side, there's potential there for an adversary or for a user to go through that process and actually enroll the device into Intune and effectively potentially then become Intune compliant. So yeah, that's usually why I don't go down that route.
Point, and I agree. And I guess just to conclude then, like the key difference that folks need to take away there, because like most folks watching this will probably be doing it with these options, right? Required to be marked as compliance. The difference is if I require to be marked as compliant, instead of saying block access and then refine it using these conditions, it's going to try and hold my hand through becoming compliant, right? That said, I guess there's a trade-off there where sometimes you might want the user to do that, right? Like maybe if you do support BYOD,
BYOD,
full MDM, stuff like that. But on the whole, this to me seems like the more, I don't know, less security risk, I guess, is the theme.
Yeah, and just kind of after you're saying that, thinking out loud in terms of how you might achieve that but minimize that risk, you could potentially just have a dedicated security group, which effectively excludes BYOD allowed users from this policy, includes them into another policy that uses the grant control instead. You could even manage that, using access packages or something along those lines. But yeah, absolutely.
Hey folks, just a quick heads up. If you're struggling with conditional access at your company, check out Threatscape's Conditional Access for Zero Trust service. It's an expert-driven framework for conditional access that eliminates gaps, makes it easy to manage, and can be fine-tuned to the unique needs of your tenant. You'll find the link in the description. Now let's get back to the video. That makes a ton of sense. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, let's stick on that theme then. So we're talking about unmanaged devices, and in this case, hey, for admins, we're going to block unmanaged devices. That's just a recap for folks from the last video. That's controlled by a group where we throw all our admins into that one. And I guess the next associated policy with that in the context of admins, but use your imagination, you can go further, is this one here, like non-PAW block. So if I hit, again, we're blocking access, going to conditions, we're using that filter here again, and we're using extension attributes here. Well, like, what's the, I don't know, I guess, do you get a lot of customers buying into this kind of thing? Because privileged access workstations, viewers to this channel might be familiar with them. They're a lot of customers, that's a big change in their model, right? So what's your experience been with that approach?
My experience is I wish more clients would adopt privileged access workstations.
Yep.
The truth of it is they don't. My experience, I tend to talk about it a lot, and some customers are interested in investigating it and trialing the use of a PAW, but realistically, not many people are actually using them. I guess in terms of this actual conditional access policy, it kind of just takes what we were doing in the previous one and takes it one step further, right? So if before we were saying only in-tune compliant or hybrid join devices are allowed to access resources, in this case, what we're saying is you can only come in from this specific device when you're coming in as an admin to any of those cloud applications. And in this case, you're using the extension attribute, which you can obviously make whatever you want it to be. There are a couple of different options you can do here as well. I think the extension attribute is easy enough for you to, manipulate and change that because they're all custom, right? You can change them to whatever you want. You could also potentially use, I think device ID could work. Yeah. So if you've already registered the device.
So that's like even more specific, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you could go down that route as well. But yeah, essentially, you're basically just saying, actually, these admins can only access these resources from this particular device.
And I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but certainly last time I looked at extension attributes for devices, you could only do it using, you could only like create those using like the Graph API. I don't know if you can do it in the admin center or not yet, but it's
yeah. I think it's still done that way. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't done it recently, but I think you're on the money there.
Definitely an advanced scenario, though, I guess is the point, right? Like, not many folks doing this kind of stuff, but it is useful. And maybe one thing, like, I'll call out, because some security researchers have picked up on this as well. When you look at the attributes that you can use in any of these filters, number one, it's against the device object as it exists in Entra. So people can fact check me in the comments here, but we're not really getting in-tune attributes here, although there may be some crossover. This is pure Entra attributes. Some of these, it's kind of like, well, what would you say? Prone to spoofing, I guess, right? Like, I mean, I look at manufacturer and model, even device name and stuff like that, right? It's like the local admin of the device could change that and therefore bypass some of your policies. Maybe not the most likely thing in the world, but it's something to keep in mind. Whereas extension attribute, that has to come from top down, I guess, is the thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I had a similar conversation with a client a while back, actually, and their suggestion was, well, we'll just use the device name. And I said, well, as soon as you know what the device name is, it's easy to bypass that, right? You just change your device name. So yeah, you're kind of on the money there.
A good point. So just, if you go down that route, you're lowering the security boundary, right? You're kind of, yeah, I get you. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, cool. So that's covered two pretty cool ways there of refining and protecting admin access. Unapproved locations. Hey, I think we covered that in the last video. That's basic IP block listing. That's cool stuff. Unsupported platforms is a bit of an interesting one. When I talk to customers, interested to get your take, when I talk to customers about this one, I'm kind of more like, this is less about security, although that does play into it a little bit, and more just about steering folks into behaving the way you want them to do, right? So if I've already got a block that says, hey, if you're not in a PAW, you're not getting in, do I really need this one as well? Well, maybe not, but it can be quite useful, I guess, to make sure, hey, I don't want my admin signing in from client Android phones or something like that, right? I guess is the point. In your customers, do they do a lot of enforcement around platforms in the OS?
I mean, the short answer is no. The platforms tend to get forgotten about. Nobody really, has any sort of dedicated platform-specific policies like we clearly do in our template policies, our baseline policies. But again, that being said, I've been very lucky. A lot of the clients that we sort of work with tend to adopt the policies that we recommend and do a really good job of implementing them. One thing to note about this particular policy that is worth remembering, in this particular scenario, though, we're actually saying admins can only come in from Windows devices. That would cause problems if you wanted to use Passkeys in the Microsoft Authenticator app for your admins.
Great point. Yeah,
So
because that's
just
been
worth
registered
noting
from
yeah.
on Windows OS. I get you. That makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. Blimey. And then you're looking at temporary exclusions and all that kind of stuff, right? Very interesting. And I guess one other thing on that point is there's also this one up here, right? Device platforms. And I guess the key distinction folks need to know about that is this is based on, hopefully I can get this right. If it is an unregistered device, an entry doesn't know exist, this is based on basically the user agent string, right, that gets passed through. And unlike the filter for devices, which is based on the entry object, this one is purely just, hey, user telling you, hey, here's what this is. So you can use that as I'll put it this way, this kind of stuff isn't particularly reliable because
No,
an
you can
adversary
spoof it,
could just
right?
change that.
Yeah.
Cool. Right, that comes together nicely. Okay, let's talk about some other. Well, passkeys, blimey. This is a this is a this is this is a landmine. I don't know if I want to step on quite now. We should probably do a full video on passkeys, right? Hold folks' hands all the way from beginning to end about it. But I guess at a high level, hey, we're doing Grant. We're saying, hey, if you're an admin, you got to use a passkey. We covered authentication strengths in the last video. What's You've done a lot of work on this. What are some of the main gotchas folks need to be aware of, right, when it comes to conditional access plus passkeys? You mentioned one just there, right?
Yeah, so obviously admins using a passkey, on the Microsoft Authenticator app, if you're blocking Android or iOS as a platform, that's going to cause you problems. One that crops up all the time, which caught me off guard the first time I came across it, was registering a passkey in the Microsoft Authenticator app if you are enforcing app protection policies against all resources. That will stop you from being able to register a passkey in the Authenticator app. There's no way to sort of exclude the Microsoft Authenticator app from within your conditional access policies. So yeah, when you're enforcing app protection policies, that will stop you from being able to register a passkey, which is very unfortunate.
Kind of blows my mind that that's still a thing because it was
right.
like, I remember hearing about this months and months ago back when passkeys went generally available, and now it's still a problem. So, and I just want to be crystal clear then, if I have app protection policies or these MAM policies on my mobile phones, and I say, hey, all apps, all mobiles have to have app protection policies. Basically, for passkeys, I got to figure out some kind of manual workaround there, right? That's the bottom line.
Exactly that, and the way I kind of got around that in the past is using access packages, so that a user kind of has to request the capability to be sort of excluded from the app protection policy temporarily, so that they can go ahead and register the passkey. I mean, in terms of a workaround, it works okay, but it's definitely not ideal at all. And I know others within the community have also come up with other solutions. Nathan McNulty has got a pretty cool one that essentially uses Azure Logic apps and Sentinel near real-time detection queries to essentially automatically remove the user from the exclusion group once the passkey's been registered, which I thought was pretty cool.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're looking at the registered authentication methods and then removing the protection if they've got that. Makes sense.
Yeah, which is pretty cool.
Makes sense.
So a couple of different ways you can do it, but I mean, the point is we shouldn't have to do those exclusions right now, I don't think.
Totally agree, totally agree. And shout out to Nathan McNulty. The two Nathans, you guys can't be in a room at the same time or the universe implodes. Okay, cool. So that's a little bit about passkeys. Definitely going to do another video on that. That'd be great to deep dive into. In the last video, we also covered register security info, so I'm going to skim past that one. Again, another bit of a minefield.
Yeah.
We also covered this concept of the different identity protection controls here, but maybe what we can call out here for folks, I'm interested to see how you do this for customers, is like, if I look at a baseline policy, we might say something like, can I see it? Yeah, here it is. We might say, well, hey, if you're a high-risk user or you have a high-risk sign-in, basically globally, we're going to block you. So I don't care who you are. If you're high-risk sign-in or user, you get blocked. But then what we can also do then is head down to the individual personas. Admins is the one we're looking at now. And we can say, well, in addition to that high, we're also going to scope this to low and medium. Point here being is if you're an admin, my tolerance for risk is far, far, far lower, right? I did hear one interesting point just on that though, where kind of maybe counterintuitively, not their admins, but their VIP users, they took the opposite approach where if you were a high risk, basically any risk, you wouldn't get blocked because if you're a VIP user, depending on what type of job you're in, you not getting access to email, communication, stuff like that, that can be a life or death scenario in some cases, right? If you think about some kind of government organizations and stuff like that. So something to consider, but I guess my question for you here, Nate, is what are the different kind of cool ways that you see folks chop and change the ability to have different risk detections at different persona targeting? What are the common themes there?
To be fair, you kind of just hit the nail on the head. So admins, absolutely, we kind of draw a line under that when I'm implementing these. There should be zero tolerance in admins. So we go ahead and we would implement them just as you see them here. So if it's a low, medium, or high risk, that they get blocked. The high risk being the one in the global policy. What we then tend to do is we continue to block high risk sign-ins for all of the personas. Again, that's done in that global policy that you looked at before. And then based on per persona, really, kind of like you said before, if you've kind of got maybe an internal only persona, which kind of covers all of your full-time employees, then typically it would be low, medium risk, provides some level of auto remediation, whether that's password change or require MFA based on user risk or sign-in risk. But then to be fair, I've had situations where they want to pull the VIP users out and they say, okay, well, actually for our VIP users, we do want to make sure that even those low and those medium ones get blocked. And then they might have some additional reporting on the back of that so that, kind of like you said there, in the case that they are blocked, there is some sort of notification that goes to somebody so that they can take action relatively quickly off the back of that. So that's typically what I tend to see the most.
Yeah, I mean, good point in terms of like taking action on stuff. Like, it's that you still want to get notifications when that high risk thing happens, right? When the user gets that flag, rather than just relying on conditional access in isolation. Now, it'll probably be live by the time before this one does. I did a video on conditional access best practices, just 5, tips for folks to keep in mind. And one of the ones I really wrestled with figuring out how to throw in there and cover was session control in terms of lifetime, right? Because, I mean, you ask 100 people, you're going to get 100 different opinions. But maybe if we dive into these ones, right? So we can maybe cover both of them in the one. So if I head to
the idea of these is to limit your token replay.
Yes, exactly. And so, for example, in this one for admins, we're saying never persist the browser session. I just this to me is just one of these ones where it's always like your mileage may vary, right? And so much of this is nuanced depending on what your use of privileged access workstations looks like versus hey, you're using your day-to-day laptop and stuff like that. But I guess the takeaway here for folks is if you use this persistent browser session option and you say never persist, keep me honest here, your Entra is essentially asking the browser, hey, when you do your cookie thing, as soon as the browser closes, the session is done. And then I would have to re-authenticate when I open that browser again. Is that an accurate assessment?
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Highly recommended definitely for admins. And to be fair, I would recommend it for any persona at least on an unmanaged device for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things I was kind of getting at is it's like when you go down this route of the browser sessions and the sign-in frequency, where these are best are for the unmanaged devices, right? Because if I've got a really secure device anyway, and I go down the route of, saying, hey, you're going to have to re-authenticate I mean, you see some crazy stuff, right? Where maybe every 1 hour, 3 hours, 6 hours, whatever. And it's like, what real security benefit are you getting at a certain stage if you're on a managed device? The better use of your time would be actually focus on securing the managed device rather than playing about with this, I guess, is the point.
Absolutely. And I think for anybody at home wondering what is that kind of sweet spot for starting to deploy signing frequency on managed devices, I typically go somewhere between, and again, this is going to be dependent on the persona, anywhere between 4 to maybe 12 hours. So for admins, I try and steer our clients towards that 4-hour mark. Some of them will go, actually, we're in and out, we are genuinely in and out all day, every day. We need that to maybe be 8 hours. So we kind of have to sort of tailor it as based on the persona and based on the client's requirements. But anywhere between sort of 4 to 12 hours is kind of what I usually go for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And this will also, again, I'm asking to keep you honest here. I think I know the answer, but that kind of sense check is, if, for example, because you mentioned like 3 or 4 hours, if, for example, I'm using the same account in the browser that I've logged into the device as, Windows Hello for Business can do single sign in and all that kind of stuff. If you lock that device and unlock the device, it resets the window, right? So the token is going to, just because it says 4 hours there, hey, if after 1 hour I lock my device and then come back, as soon as I unlock it, boom, another 4 hours. That's the idea here. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool, right. It's funny, these things, it's like, man, there's so much to conditional explain. It's like, this isn't the most intuitive thing in the world. Okay, cool. And so that kind of roughly sums up a lot of the admin stuff, apart from this one here. Device exclusion. Yeah, so this is an interesting one. And this was really born of that idea that for your exclusions, you should have another policy that refines those exclusions. So earlier we covered the policies that allowed a user, mandated that an admin had to be on a privileged access workstation or at least a compliant device. And actually what was in that policy was a group exclusion for this group here. So what's the design philosophy here? Like, is this just overcomplicating stuff, or does this really, really help folks in the real world?
I mean, it definitely complicates it a little bit more, but the idea is, the goal is the same. It's minimizing the attack surface as much as possible. So if in our default policies, we're saying admins can only come in from a compliant device.
Yep. So that's this policy here, right? The one that says
exactly. Yeah.
Admins have to come in from a compliant device, and then the exclusions are here.
Exactly. And where an example scenario that an admin might run into where this would be a problem is maybe they need to sign into their admin account from a device that isn't known by Intune or isn't known by Entra. So maybe a server, maybe they're, installing the MDVM scanner agent, or, making a change to Entra Connect is one that crops up a lot. In this default configuration, they would be blocked from signing in whenever they try and authenticate in that scenario, because the server doesn't have an object in Entra, it doesn't have an object in Intune, and it can't see it, essentially. So the idea behind this is saying, well, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to allow the administrator to exclude themselves from that policy. But when we exclude them from that policy, we're going to minimize the risk by saying, actually, now you can sign in from an unmanaged device, but you can only sign in from these trusted IPs. And the idea being is just minimizing that attack surface as much as possible for that particular exclusion. But it is a little bit of a pain, because what you often find then is, if an administrator is working from a remote location, maybe they're working from home, as soon as they go through this whole process and trigger the exclusion, now they can sign in from their server that they're trying to do some sort of administrative work on, but it will just boot them out of their session from their local device if they're working from home, for example.
I get you.
Because obviously their home IP is not a trusted IP. But there is some trade-offs. There is some trade-offs there.
I get you. So kind of one of these ones, approach it delicately, but it can really, what would you say, reduce the blast radius, I guess, is the point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alrighty. Well, I'll tell you what, like that kind of sums up a pretty solid approach to kind of securing admin access. And there's other cool stuff you can do, right? Like you could use Defender for Cloud apps to say, hey, you also don't get to access the productivity apps and all that kind of stuff, right? And maybe that brings us on to some of the other advanced scenarios we can do. So if we move on from admins and we talk about internals, externals, and guests, these other types of personas, one of the ones that would be cool to kind of spend a bit of time on is, well, maybe the starting point for that is the distinction between, why on earth in our baselines do we have different policies for whether or not you're on a desktop client or a desktop web? And I guess the short version there is because the client is going to allow you to perform way more data exfiltration really, really fast than the web, right? So for example, let's head into this one here. And basically, hey, if you are a generic internal user and you're accessing any of our apps through Entra, well, hey, we're basically saying if you're on a desktop through this filtering mechanism, so this is set up, yeah, cool, and it's a client app, right? So that full Win32 app, you get blocked if you're not on a managed device. BYOD access, if you're on a desktop, you don't get to sign into the full Outlook. Instead, what we're going to require you to do is sign into the web version. And really, the reason we want to do that is because at that point, we can use conditional access app control. And that's where things get really, really bloody cool. So do you want to maybe talk folks through why you would architect it in that way with different rules for different types of access?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess ultimately the idea is control, right? There is more control by in being able to force a user through a web browser, because ultimately that's where conditional access app control can kick in, which is essentially part of Defender for Cloud Apps, CASB, right? So reverse proxy. And as soon as we start forcing the users to go via the web, we get all of those additional controls. And you've got in your example there, conditional access app control's got some built-in options within conditional access. So straight away, we can quite easily block downloads. I think that if you select the drop down, you've also got the option to monitor activity. Or if you want to get super fancy, you can use a custom policy and you can actually hand that off to Defender for Cloud Apps, where you can put together a custom policy with your own conditions. So ultimately, you're in a better position to secure access to those resources, which you just don't get the same level of control if you're allowing the full fat client to access your data.
Sure, absolutely. Like one of the examples I give is, because we do a bunch of work on Purview, right? And we've had Devlina on doing a few videos with us on Purview, and so many customers that they, with all the best will in the world, they're like, hey, we want to do DLP and we want to do sensitivity labels and all that good stuff, and they don't even have something that stops BYD access to the OneDrive sync client. And it's like, you could do all the DLP policies in the world that you want, but if I can just go home and sync 100 terabytes of SharePoint, what's the point, right?
Yep.
So
Nailed it.
I guess this is like a fundamental thing that everyone needs to kind of take away. Okay, so that covers the desktop scenario, and we've got more stuff here for internals, like block unsupported platforms and locations.
And again, just to clarify, in comparison to our admin ones, that's because we are likely going to need to allow different platforms for our internal full-time employees than we would for our admins, right?
Great point.
And by splitting into those separate personas, we've got that granularity.
That makes a lot of sense. So yeah, so like for example, for my admins, hey, everyone gets the same standard privileged access workstation. But for my end users, this guy could have a Mac, this guy could have a Linux device, this other one could have 100 different types of Windows devices. It allows that flexibility. And in the last video, we covered location blocking and all the kind of cool stuff you can do around there. We've covered this idea of session persistence. And here you'll see that we're just kind of taking that idea we discussed and hey, we're saying, hey, we're just going to extend that to the unmanaged devices, right? So if you're on an unmanaged BYOD device, we're going to allow it, but we're going to limit it so that it never persists and it's going to make you sign in every 4 hours. And a few thoughts come to mind for me there. Number one is you don't have to do that. The best security would be, hey, just don't allow them to get access on unmanaged devices in the first place, right? So always keep that in mind. But then the other reason that we're kind of doing that is it's just some type of degree of protection against token theft or that kind of idea. It's not by no means bulletproof. And actually, in this case, you can also see for desktop managed, we're going to have a sign-in frequency of every 14 days. I'm always get mixed opinions about whether that's necessary. Hey, we'll keep it in the baseline. And then same for mobile devices. Quite often you see these are in place for like compliance reasons. Like, hey, we just want to make sure that we can tick a box.
I think 14 days is a really nice sweet spot as well that most people typically wouldn't even notice, especially if you're using something like Windows Low for Business. You're never even going to know.
Absolutely. And I guess down here, we just get one that says, hey, if you're accessing Windows 365, you're going to have to do a sign-in every single time. I love this one for BYOD because Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop, there's such a compelling case there for some degree of secure BYOD access, but we don't want that token lying around on an unsecured device. So that's one way you can do that.
Yep.
Require compliant network.
Look at that next one you've got.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So, first thing is, a heck of a lot more about what we're about to dig into than I do. But this is where we're using conditional access really to branch into that other really cool Entra capability of global secure access, right?
The secure service edge, indeed, yeah.
So if I fumble my way around this, and you can maybe talk folks through it. So I'm targeting Office 365 here. And then under networks, I got this cool new thing where I can say I'm going to exclude compliant networks. Everything that isn't a compliant network gets blocked. And then under conditions, well, actually, it's the same thing. It's just shown in a different place. Talk me through what it means. Number one, what is a compliant network? And number two, why would I want to do this? Because it's applying to any devices in this policy, right? Even if it's a managed device, we're applying it. So what's going on here?
Yeah, so I guess cover the first one. So in terms of the sort of compliant network, that is essentially what we're talking about there is what Microsoft call SSE, so Secure Service Edge. And kind of in crude terms, it's Microsoft's global infrastructure, Microsoft's global network. Yeah, Global Secure Access is the sort of umbrella branding for that, for those features. And you can kind of think of it as a private VPN service that is sort of contained within your Microsoft 365 tenant, if you like. So only when you're connecting to the Secure Service Edge from within your environment, you are connecting to your own private VPN that uses Microsoft's global infrastructure. And the idea behind doing that is that you can enforce the use of requiring access to that network location before you can access your Office 365 applications. And I guess the benefit to that is that you can protect from token theft, because you can say you cannot access Office 365. In your case, you cannot access Office 365 resources until you have connected to the Secure Service Edge. And yeah, and in this case, you are essentially pushing your Microsoft traffic through the SSE network.
And again, so the analogy is, hey, it's almost like saying back in the good old days where you'd say, hey, to access this app, you need to be on the VPN. It's not, it's such a crude comparison, but
yeah, I know.
Same rough idea, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah.
As far as, hey, to access this, you're going to have to go through a kind of network filtering capability. And the big thing for that is token theft, right? Insofar as it's bound to hopefully I can get this right. It's bound to the device via the global secure access client, which means it's kind of, what would you say? We get all the benefits of things like continuous access evaluation and stuff like that, right? Where as soon as that user is no longer available in the tenant or the IP address changes, boom, you don't get it, right?
Exactly that. And it also requires an Entra joined device. So the device has to be Entra joined. I think it supports hybrid join as well. I'm fairly certain.
So it's got to have some kind of device relationship there with Entra.
Exactly. Yeah. You couldn't do it for just a standard domain joined device or workplace device.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That's cool. All right, we should do a whole video on global secure access. That'd be fun. All right, so that clarifies that other one, and we're now moving on to externals and guests, and this is where things can get really intricate depending on your appetite. And what I mean by that, do we have any examples here? This is a bit of a tame version of the baseline. Let me see. You can see there we're jumping from 217 to 305. I've probably stripped out a few here, but essentially what we are capable of doing with conditional access is, well, let's build a policy from scratch. What we are capable of doing is saying something like, well, hey, if you are, let's say, a guest or even an internal user on a BYOD access, but let's say you're a guest and you're trying to access my tenant. So, hey, we want guests to collaborate on SharePoint and Teams and all that kind of stuff, right? One thing you can do, and this is where I get scared to even talk about this sometimes, because it is such a powerful thing, but it's also a little bit fiddly, is, okay, so first off, guests block. Cool, right, hardcore security. Yeah, sure, all guests just block them. There's other ways, there's better ways to do that than through conditional access, but it would achieve it. But we want them to get access to some apps, right? Now, conventionally, by default with guests, they just get access. Granted, there's permissions and things going on in the background, right? But fundamentally, there's no control over the ticket issuance from a conditional access perspective, right? So if I say all resources, and the risk of that is you're almost just like one configuration error away from making a guest user maybe not having access to something, but at least being aware of something that you would rather they weren't aware of. So what you can do is you can say all guest users or all internal users, all resources block access. except for the common one would be something like Office 365. That's right there. I didn't even have to type it. Office 365, right? So, hey, if you're a guest, you can get into Office 365, but you can't get into my ERP system, my HR system, all the rest of it, right? It's just another level of defense. And the internal reason you might want to do something similar is, hey, if you're an internal user on a BYOD device, you would maybe get into, I don't know, the software that lets you read your payroll information, but you don't get to go into the ERP system, right? So it's application allow listing at either the user level or the device level. Now, I think it's worth calling it at this point. Conditional access was never really designed for this. And this is if you really wanted to push it and do some kind of cool stuff, but it does increase the level of administrative overhead, right?
You're telling me.
God knows you, yeah. As I say, God knows you've had to wrestle with this a lot. Why don't you take the wheel here and explain, right? So, hey, I'm just going to go ahead and do this, right? So all my guests, they only get access to Office 365. Excellent. Happy with that. I go away and I turn this on. What's going to go wrong here?
Yeah, so ultimately we're kind of following the same process as we had before. So we're targeting all resources with that grant controller block. Anything that we exclude, the guest user in this case is going to have access to, right? In this case, which is Office 365. The problem with this is that there are going to be other dependency applications, or let's call them audience applications, which the guest user is going to need to be able to access in order to do certain things within the tenant. And an example of that one from a guest perspective might be when you invite a guest, they have to go through an invitation process, right? Before they can actually be classified as a guest member within your tenant. Well, that process of inviting a guest user, and the guest user being able to accept it, there's actually an app for that. There's actually an app called the Microsoft Invitation Acceptance, something or other. And in this case, because we are not explicitly excluding it from the policy, if you were to invite a guest and enforce this policy, they're not going to be able to go through that process of actually accepting the invitation. They're going to get blocked because you are blocking that particular application that allows them to go through that invitation process.
So like everything is an app at the end of the day, right? Anything I'm interfacing with as a user, you go far enough down the stack, everything you're touching is an app. And some
everything
of those apps
is an app. And in certain scenarios, that one particular scenario could be 4 apps that you actually need in order to make something work. So yeah, in terms of a guest scenario, that's kind of covers that. One that I come up against a lot is we've kind of covered internals and a little bit of externals, but let's say, for example, we're enforcing a managed device all the time for our internal users. Even in the policies we looked at before, it was registering security information. So registering MFA requires a managed device. That's great until you run into the scenario where you need to do a remote onboarding and the user's not been sent a new device yet. Maybe it's a rush job and they need to go through that onboarding process remotely from an unmanaged device. How would you achieve that? Well, you need to then be able to exclude the user from the policies that we can just walk through. And the problem is that there are so many different applications that kind of sit underneath the security info page, if you like, trying to find out which ones you actually need to exclude from the policy in order to allow them to go through and do that remote onboarding is, to be honest, quite crazy. Hopefully, you're going to show us in the sign-in logs now.
Yes. So yeah, this is a little bit of preparation did go into this video. We're not completely winging it here. This is something we did earlier. So I signed in before we started recording here. And this was actually the first time I'd used this in prod, right? So to your point now, I'm trying to remember, I go to conditional access and sign-ins. And let's say the sign-in failed and now I want to investigate what apps I also have to exclude, right? So if I go into this policy, I then head to resource, I expand that, and boom. So this is what you were talking about earlier when you mentioned dependent apps / audience apps. This is where, in order to get to my end destination, which was Microsoft Graph, you also had to invoke all these other ones. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. Which is also kind of like a little bit of a red flag, because when you see the resource of Microsoft Graph, that makes you think, well, do I need to exclude Graph as an application, which is just mind-blowing. Sure. The answer is no, you absolutely don't have to exclude Graph. What you need to do is look at all of the dependency apps or the audience apps that sit underneath it. So kind of back to our scenario before of where maybe we are blocking all cloud apps except Office 365. in that scenario, if you're an internal user, and even in fact, even on a managed device in that scenario, if you tried to access the security info page, you would be hit with a block, right? And you can essentially troubleshoot that by doing what you're doing here. So when you go into the sign-in logs, view the actual particular sign-in, figure out which conditional access policies are matching, and straight away you get all of those audience applications. And kind of like you said there, they're all of the dependency apps that sit underneath that particular resource. And as soon as you know those applications, you know exactly which ones you need to exclude from your policy. And this is a really good example. Yeah, I had the exact same scenario for a client just last week, where we needed to allow that a particular persona to be able to register security information from an unmanaged device. And we needed to figure out what those dependency apps were. What you're looking at is the bulk of them. So the AAD reporting, the credential configuration, Windows, Azure, Active Directory. And interestingly, this is a good segue into some of the recent changes that Microsoft are implementing. You've got one there that says service principal not found. Historically, all of these apps, well, some of these applications didn't always exist within your tenant, and I think there was quite a lot of different factors that kind of determined whether they would be there or not. But historically, some of these enterprise apps or these service principals didn't exist, and you had to go through a process of manually adding them with some PowerShell commands, and then you could effectively
pull that up right now. So for
brilliant.
example, like if I pull open VS Code here, plug for GitHub Copilot, which I've been using relentlessly recently. But yeah, so you can see here, this is what we used to have to do, right? So I guess this is because of the changes they made, this is becoming less of a requirement, where in this case, one I had to do is I had to register the Intune enrollment app because it wasn't showing up. I guess the point, the app was always in the tenant. It's just that it didn't appear in that list of enterprise apps or your conditional access apps. So if folks have ever been in a situation where I'm going into the app selector and conditional access, and hey, I know an app's there, but I just can't find it. This is what we used to have to do to get it there. But to your point, like, get rid of VS Code now. Microsoft are starting to add them anyway, so they'll just show they're out the box.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's sort of two changes there that Microsoft are doing, and one is they are slowly but surely adding in those service principals for us. So in your case, you've got service principal not found. I suspect if you leave it long enough, that will probably fix itself. You can still go ahead and just add it in yourself by running that PowerShell though. And then the second one is making those apps available in the conditional access UI, which they historically never were. So in order to include or exclude applications that kind of fell under that scenario, we had to use custom security attributes. And that's a rabbit hole.
I'll tell you what, let's test one while we're here. Like, one that always comes to mind for me, kind of reverting to form and thinking about Defender, right? That one was always a nightmare. What was it? Something like with
Microsoft Defender ATP.
Yeah, it was like it didn't support app protection policies, and therefore it basically wouldn't let you sign in, something like that. So is that
Yeah, exactly that. So so if you were requiring Defender on a mobile device via mobile application management, because the Microsoft Defender ATP service principal didn't support or doesn't support app protection policies, you would just find yourself in a loop. You get stuck in a sign-in loop. So you effectively had to exclude that application from your app protection policies. And yeah, I mean, historically, we would have to register the service principal via PowerShell, go ahead and add a custom security attribute to it, and then use that in your application filters to exclude it from the policy. Now, at least in the tenants I've looked at, Microsoft Defender ATP does show up. Should all be one word. Interestingly, so you don't have it.
So this might be a rollout thing, right? Because, for example, we've seen the one earlier that said service principal not found. I guess, as this stuff rolls out to tenants, it could just be there. But it does kind of...
Are you in a position to add it in the video?
Wow. Can we do it live?
Yeah, I've got...
Live dangerous. Let's try it.
Give me a minute. I've got the...
Yeah, so we can try this. So if we get the app ID, we can add that. Could I just pull it?
I've got it. I'll send it to you now. Here we go. App ID is the... I drop you...
Those Teams, so I'll get it on my phone and type it manually. Got it. Okay, so let's try this one. If I get this right.
Nailed it.
So let's try running the whole script. So it should ask me to sign into the graph, right? So that should spin over to Edge. Am I going to get Edge popping up? Yeah, there it goes. I'll sign in with an admin account. Auth is complete. Head back to VS Code. Oh, no, it's popping back up. Yeah, I want to sign as an admin. Go back to VS Code. Yeah, there we go. Cool. Microsoft Defender ATP. Yeah, so that definitely didn't show
That's
up
the one.
before. So let's
So
call.
historically, you would have done that, but it still wouldn't show in the conditional access UI.
Gotcha. You had
You'd
to
have
use
to
the
go
attributes,
into,
right?
you'd have to find the enterprise app in Entra. There you go.
Nice, nice, cool. So this is the whole bunch of new stuff here, right? So number one, showing me the audiences. Number two, adding some of these by default uh, in the selector. And it's just in this case, maybe a timing issue or whatever. In my tenant, I didn't have it. And if I don't have it, that's how I can get it. That's
Yeah.
cool. Very cool.
So yeah, definitely simplifying things, making it a little bit easier to do everything natively within the policy UI.
And I'll tell you what, like one thing that is worth just being very explicit about for viewers is like if I just go into the app selector and I search Defender, there's a ton of stuff here. And if you don't get this right, you could break tons and tons of stuff, right? Like don't just go clicking around here and be like, oh, I'm just gonna block Defender for Cloud for AI. Like unless you have a really good reason you know what you're doing, just don't be silly here. It's also kind of cool to know that you can see some interesting stuff here about like naming conventions and stuff that Microsoft use in their production environment. That kind of kills my OCD. Anywho, let's move on. So that's cool. That's cool. That's a pretty advanced scenario there. And maybe just for the sake of thoroughness, we should still comment on, or at least show folks that whole custom attribute thing, right? So let's see if I can find my way there. So if I head to custom security attributes, do I have the right permissions? I do, yes. Even if you're global admin, you need to add extra permissions to get into this, right? So I get an attribute set here and then you can create it there. I got one called conditional access. I got one called BYOD access, and it's a string that says true or false. But I guess what you're doing here is you're creating an attribute, which in my head is just a tag, right? You apply that tag to an enterprise app, and then over in conditional access, rather than going through the apps and choosing individual apps like we just did, you could choose the tag. And that maybe has a, what do you say, that's almost got a benefit of being maybe, just pick some random one here, dare I say almost more scalable, because I don't have to go in and add loads of stuff. I can just add a tag and then done. So I can almost give people permission to do that without touching conditional access as well.
Yeah, and to be fair, that's kind of why I still think it has its place. Here we go. Yeah, this is it. So
that's it there. Yep.
Really good example.
Gotcha.
There you go. Yeah, include.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah, so on your include or your exclude tab, and then choose your filter. And I think it still has its place. A good example of where you might use it is if you have a bunch of applications that only admins should be accessing. You could maybe use an attribute for grant admins as an example. Apply that to your admin apps, whether that's the Microsoft Exchange, REST API, PowerShell, Azure AD PowerShell, whatever it might be. Assign that attribute, and then what you can do is, have we got an admin apps block policy in your list?
Point.
I didn't see one, but
no, I don't know.
Essentially,
might do. So we'll tell you what. Let's create one. So for example, if I go here, we'll go new policy. We'll call this one admins.
Well, no, I would do it as internals.
Oh yes, okay, I get you. So maybe something like, oh, this is a lab. The name doesn't matter. Let's say so. So you'd have your number there, internals, and then you'd say like admin apps, and then just block. That kind of idea.
Absolutely.
And then I could go assign the group, go to target resources, select resources.
Exactly.
From here, I would choose the attribute that says, hey, this is an admin app, and then just go down here and say block. That's
absolutely, yeah. And you could add additional ones in there. I think Microsoft give you a bundled app for the admin portals, and there's a couple in there that are already there as well. But yeah, you could effectively use that filter. And let's say, for example, you've got the same policy, the admin apps block policy for internals, externals, whatever personas you've got. Like you've said before, all you then need to do is add the tag, the custom attribute to the app, and then that's just going to apply to all of those policies, right? You don't have to go in and manually change each one. So I do think that the custom attributes still have a place, and they do make it a little bit more efficient, a little bit more scalable.
Yep. And I guess it doesn't just have to be admin stuff, right? Like, I mean, I'm thinking out loud here, but like, let's say, for example, you had highly sensitive apps. Like, let's say the app that your folks use to process payroll, you could limit that to a persona for finance folks or something like that, right? Just an additional defense in depth kind of capability, right? Cool. I think we've broken the admin center. It's not showing me my policies there. Let's do a wee refresh. There we go. Okay, cool.
If I had £1 for every time Entra broke itself when I was playing with conditional access, I don't know what it is. Every now and again, especially when you're importing policies, I think it hits a rate limit or something, and then what it does is it kicks you
Right.
out. You go back in, and what tends to happen is, you know how Entra tells you whether you're licensed for P1 or P2 or Entra ID free? It reverts to Entra ID free, and then you're like, what the hell's going on here? You got to wait 10
You're never going to
minutes,
get anything done.
refresh it, and then it comes back. Yeah, I've seen it all the time.
Dear. Yeah. It's the whole running joke, right? They do it for Intune, but it applies to Entra as well, where it's like the S in Entra is for speed. Just kidding. Love Entra. So I guess sorry, one final thing that just hit me, because you mentioned the Microsoft Admin Portals app. That's such a kicker sometimes, because keep me honest here, I think that also controls access to the Exchange quarantine or something weird like that, doesn't it? So
Yeah,
you
so
might
I don't.
intuitively think block that, but it can break stuff, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, and so you've got to be selective with use of it. The question I usually ask clients is, are you using the quarantine? If they're not using the quarantine, maybe they're using a
Go
third
for
party
it.
service, in which case you can block it. If they are, then I don't recommend blocking that bundle app, but instead blocking some of the other ones, like I think it's the Windows Service Management API and a handful of others, and some more that you can add in,
That makes a lot of
manually as
sense.
well.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, maybe two other things to cover. This one we'll just go over really quick. Service accounts as a persona. In this model that we're looking at now, when we say service accounts, this is just normal user accounts that you're using as a service account, right? So this isn't a service principal. If you want to do those and IP allow list those, you can do it, but I think it still requires that. Is it the license workload identity
I was going to
license or
say,
something
we're
like
talking
that?
about workload IDs there. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's a rant for an alternative video. And then the other thing is emergency access management, right? Now, you talk about controversial subject. Everyone's got an opinion about how to manage break glass accounts or emergency access accounts. I guess a few things have changed in the last year, right? So number one, they have to have MFA now, right? So it used to be our break glass accounts didn't. Now they do. And essentially it's just a case of deciding, well, what type of MFA, right? And look, 100 different ways of doing it. As a generic recommendation, what I kind of go with is something like saying, well, have two accounts and maybe have two different authentication requirements for each one, right? And what I mean by that is maybe one has to use a FIDO key. And the good thing with that is you can register multiple FIDO keys, right? So your IT team could each register one. Or you could have it where, hey, we're going to use a third party MFA for the other account or something like that, right? There's a whole bunch of ways you can chop and change that. I'm kind of at the stage now where I don't like giving advice about what's the right way to do break glass accounts, but I don't mind giving advice about what's the wrong way to do them. If that makes
Yeah.
sense, right? Because there's so much just nuance there and risk tolerance and all the rest of it, right? I guess throw it over to you. What are some of the common themes you see your customers opting for when it comes to managing break glass accounts?
Yeah. So I keep it super simple when I'm talking to my clients about it. But again, it's very dependent on their scenario. And I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll cover the way you've got it configured here first. Super useful if the client has a third-party MSP or a SOC provider where they've got their own break glass account. In that case, maybe for whatever reason they can't use FIDO keys. They can't use FIDO2 security, a physical security key. So OAuth is usually appropriate because these third-party MSPs have usually got some sort of shared password manager where you can store the software OTP code in it, so it's accessible from multiple engineers. So that's a really great example of where what you've got here kind of makes sense. They could have their break glass account, the first account is internal, got multiple keys registered that all of their internal guys have got, but the second one is owned by the MSP, and they use that different MFA authentication method, in this case, software OAuth. So that's
in this
where
case, it's good. In this case, we've got a specific authentication strength for that, right? Say, hey, it has to be this one here. Gotcha.
Yep, absolutely. So this is what I usually implement if it goes down that kind of track. If they don't have any external third party that helps them with IT, or if those third parties are happy to store a FIDO2 security key, that's usually what I recommend. Just keep it simple. FIDO2 security key registered to both of them, and like I say, multiple. And then you effectively just treat that physical security key in the kind of same way as you would have done with a password for those break glass accounts in the past, stored in a fireproof safe, multiple locations, and kind of handle it that way, really.
Absolutely.
And then, to be fair, I think, have you got an additional policy in there as well? Is there a location block in there? So I think the idea of that is that you for the second account, because you're allowing a less less secure, slightly less secure method, authentication method, you're saying, well, okay, we're going to allow software OAuth as MFA, but only from these locations.
Exactly, yeah. And so much of this is dependent on what your unique situation is, right? But it's kind of like saying, well, maybe as a starting point, if someone needs emergency access, they just grab the FIDO key and do it from there. And because it's tied to a physical object, and the barrier for compromising that physical FIDO key is so high, right, that you can kind of tolerate it to be accessed from any device. Because let's face it, if you're using these break glass accounts, you're probably going to be having a terrible time and you just want to get in there and get it fixed, right? So we have to throw a little bit of caution to the wind. But then, hey, if I don't have access to that, and I do use what is generally considered a less secure type of MFA, and well, at least limit it to saying, well, hey, the MSP can do that, but they have to be doing it from the IP address we know the MSP uses, something like that, right? And even saying stuff like this there's just so much nuance to what we do. Even saying something like, the authenticator wrap and a rotating password, a rotating 6-digit code. Even saying something like that is less secure. It's like, well, sure, in the absolute sense, you could maybe call it less secure, but it depends, right? Because the main thing that you're protecting is the token theft at the point of issuance, right? And so if you've got all these other mitigations in place, it doesn't move the needle that much. Yeah, so I guess maybe that's a good point to finish it. It's just kind of reminding folks that when we go through all these policies, so much of it is just you do you. You know what I mean?
You've got to look. You say it all the time. You've got to be pragmatic in your approach. That's kind of what it boils down to.
All right, cool. Well, I mean, in this example, we got 67 policies, but there's a whole bunch more you can do.
That's pretty weak for you, Rue.
Tame. It's such whenever you start talking about, what is the ideal number of conditional access policies, you get into such a theological battle with people where some people have really strong opinions. I maybe as a concluding thought, I totally agree that less policies, just as a general principle, is better than more policies, right? If you can do it with one, then why not? But if you really want to get into some of the nitty gritty that we've covered in this video, really level up and just have more nuance, which a lot of enterprises do. Put it this way, just because you get 67 policies don't mean you're doing anything wrong, right? Contrary to it. Cool. Okay. Well, listen, pleasure doing this again with you, Nathan. We covered a bunch here. I'm very interested to find out what folks want more content about. So, we'll definitely do more content on, we should definitely do global secure access. And hell, we even spoke a little bit about identity governance there and access packages and stuff like that, right? We could do a bunch of content on that. But let us know in the comments what you're after. If you found this video informative, give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more conditional access stuff. And me and Nate will see you in the future.